Hello and welcome back or welcome to the channel. I'm Loudguns and about 12 hours ago I stepped back onto Scottish ground after my weekend away in Manchester at CitizenCon. And there was a lot of stuff covered over the 2 days, so this is by no means going to be a comprehensive review. But instead I thought it'd be cool to run through a few of my personal highlights from the show while they're still fresh. I'll also link the full videos from CIG, so if anything catches your eye you can go and dive a bit deeper. If this sounds good to you, then grab a cup of tea while I roll the intro, then let's get into it. In this vid, we're going to dive into some of my key takeaways from CitCon. Obviously, we have no hope of covering everything, so I've just picked out 4 topics to dive in on a bit. But my tier 0 takeaway from the entire thing was just how important community is, and is going to be in this game. To its core, Star Citizen is a proper MMORPG, with the first 2 M's being incredibly important. And I think after this weekend there might be a large number of you thinking you need to expand out and try and link up with others to get the most out of the game. Within our Discord, we welcome everyone and offer a number of events to give you a taste of multiplayer and multi-crew action. So if you're keen, please do hop in via the link in the video description down below. We do also have an org, but there's absolutely no pressure to sign up. We just hope that you like what you see and experience and want to, but there's no issue if you don't. There might also, as is tradition at this time of year, be a few folks on the sidelines thinking about getting into the game. Without a doubt in the coming weeks there is going to be a free fly, where as long as you've got an account set up you'll be able to jump in and try the game before you buy. CitCon always gets the hype up, but just remember that the now game and the future game are 2 different things. I'd encourage you to try out and see if you enjoy the now before you dive in head first. Many of us find it really fun, but it is still an alpha, there are a lot of bugs, and it really isn't for everyone. If you do create an account, just be sure to use a referral code to get some extra bonus starter cash. Mine's the one up on screen now, but if you've got any mates who play already, please just ask them for theirs. So without further ado, let's crack on with some of the highlights. On day 1, we kicked off with Benoit leading the Brave New Worlds presentation, explaining the tech infrastructure being used to develop and enhance the game with new worlds, biomes, flora, fauna and locations. There was some really fascinating insight into how CIG are using a rules-based system to more rapidly create planets, with a greater degree of diversity. And this was a huge presentation, but if I were to zoom in on one key aspect of it, then it would have to be Starchitect. Currently in Stanton we have 1,626 points of interest, but even with just 100 players that can start to feel a bit underwhelming. As player counts expand, we've recently seen 1,000 player server meshing tests. This just isn't really going to cut it. Nobody wants to wait an hour for a bunker to become available to do a mercenary mission. Through modularization, the team are building libraries of layouts, buildings and assets, and then by using the Starchitect tool they can generate thousands of points of interest, maintaining the level of fidelity and applying logic to the distribution, but greatly improving the speed at which planets can be populated with locations. And at the same time they're thinking about and seeking to avoid what I'm going to call the Starfield issue, where every location simply looks and feels identical to 100 others you've been in before. Locations can be grouped into clusters, ensuring coherency in terms of what you'll find. So a distribution centre would be near to forward operating bases, which would be near to mining outposts, which would be near to caves, making sure that there's some degree of logic to what you find. And similarly this logic will extend to the factions that you'll find there, the shops and the commodities that are available to buy and sell. These clusters can then be grouped together into sectors, allowing the devs to create far denser gameplay opportunities. So within the presentation, a single half of a planet was shown with more than 3,000 points of interest, providing far more gameplay for the suggested population sizes, not only in terms of missions but also in the form of things like exploration, as there's so much more to discover. I'm a big fan of the level of detail and fidelity you find in SC, but to be honest this is one thing that has worried me for some time. wondering exactly how such large areas were going to avoid feeling bleak and lifeless. So this presentation was really timely and reassuring in that regard. In my predictions for CitCon video, one of the things that really got my hopium levels rising was base building. For me, as a self-confessed survival game junkie, base building was the showstopper from last year's show, and this year it didn't disappoint, with a huge focus on the crafting system, player bases, and the ships that might help you out. This was essentially half of the second day in itself, and it encompassed a huge volume of info, so we'll be back to refresh this in the future with a deep dive video. We did get some great clarity on the crafting system, with blueprints that you can acquire via trade, missions, and reputation, forming the basis of the mechanic. Through scientific research, you can also invest time and resources in upgrading your blueprints to make even better items. Each recipe will specify a certain amount and type of resources required to craft an item. The presentation also included the concept of material quality, which will be carried forward from base gathering through refining. All raw mats will have a quality stat, so exploration is going to be essential to locate the highest quality ingredients. Quality will have a knock-on impact onto item stats, allowing players to build one-of-a-kind items. If you've ever played another MMO, you'll probably know that this sort of system will have a huge influence on player relations, with high-quality items and mats forming the basis for trade within a player-driven economy. There was a really cool segment specifically about building our own physical shops, and while you might be able to list items for sale via a Mobilglass app, the point of sale will always be a player base, and this gives a whole new reason for players to travel the verse, specifically heading to Castra or Nyx just because you've heard of one org that sells the highest quality assault rifles or heavy armor sets. Within crafting, base building is probably the most anticipated element, and it was really cool to see a demonstration of the actual mechanics CIG are working with. It's all work in progress, but I do really love the concept of a more RTS style augmented view, thanks to the construction drones that get sent up by the building vehicles. The actual building was all sped up in these presentations, but essentially once you place your structures, the drones will build them for you, going and helping themselves to resources from the local area as long as you can keep them supplied. I'm a big fan of this modular construction, since it allows a decent amount of customization without the block-by-block systems from games like Ark or Space Engineers, that can cripple server performance in the long run and can also lead to a lot of bases just turning into big square cubes. The team also demonstrated much larger scale bases using the construction hub, including large extraction facilities, refineries, and freight elevator networks. The team also demonstrated much larger scale bases using the construction hub, including large extraction facilities, refineries, and freight elevator networks. They did want to be clear that extraction bases like these don't just mean free resources forever, as you'll need to keep these buildings supplied with materials and maintain and repair the machinery if it's damaged by the elements. I'm really hopeful that CIG make full use of their experimental test servers to let us get our hands on this stuff. Having previously played a lot of building and crafting games, I know that this is one of the hardest things to get right without everything being pretty janky. But I'm pretty sure based on the level of crowd excitement during these presentations that CIG wouldn't be short of a few testers. The team also teased fabrication hangars in this segment, where players will be able to construct their own ships, assuming that they have the blueprints for them. It was confirmed that, since these ships will be a crafted item, you'll be able to sell them to other players in your own shops. So I love that they're showing everything from little cabins in the woods to huge sprawling orc bases, with huge industrial and logistical implications. And while I know that the complexity of crafting might not appeal to everyone, I'm glad that they're going to the depth they are with it. Because with player trade, it then encourages the interaction between players, giving us reasons to work together, compete with one another, and seek each other out. So you may notice that I personally am a bit more day 2 focused. It's not that I didn't enjoy the Squadron 42 playthrough, and I will certainly be enjoying blasting some Vandal when the time comes, but first and foremost I'm here for Star Citizen, the MMO. From the beginning of my journey in this game, it's been the scale that's really captivated me. Not just of the environments and the ships, but also of the possibilities to work with and in competition with other human beings. Starcit as a game can 100% accurately be accused of a lot of scope creep. The freedom granted to Chris Roberts and CIG is both a blessing and a curse. On the positive side, we're getting a game that isn't just a rehashing of the latest thing to do well, and there's real ambition to this project that is absent from many other AAA titles. On the downside, there's always been a lingering doubt that the game will ever be declared ready. So Rich Tyra's presentation defining exactly what constitutes Star Citizen 1.0 was music to my ears, and to my mind it represents a really healthy rebasing of expectations for the game. The project is still incredibly ambitious, but what they're setting out now for this initial live release actually seems doable. I thought this graphic visualised the high-level goal really well, with the 1 standing for improved performance baselines, a polished experience, finished game loops, and a lack of resets, while the 0.0 reaffirms the commitment to continuing development, with new features and content being added, but without the Tier 0 implementation we've come to love and hate. So how about content? Well, to start with, in terms of star systems, the expectation is that 1.0 will have 5 of them, versus the 1, soon to be 2 that we have now. Alongside Stanton and Pyro, we got confirmation on day 1 that the lawless system Nyx will be System 3, while the lawful but border territory Castra will be number 4. But the big news on that front from day 2 is that the highly rich and developed Terra system will be system number 5. I'm pretty pleased because in a video I made a while back guessing the next 4 systems, I went for Pyro, Nyx, Magnus and Terra, so 3 out of 4 isn't too bad. The inclusion of Terra is so important in my opinion, as it allows for a real range between the lawless systems of Nyx and Pyro, the more developing or frontier systems of Stanton and Castra, and then the highly developed safe zone of Terra. This should create good environments for all types of players and allow you to get the right risk-reward balance for your personal playstyle. It was also really encouraging to see that the actual level of safety in the safer systems is set to increase, with scaling AI responses when players get attacked in these areas. So rather than just having to fight off the bad guys yourself, a lot of the time you're going to be getting AI coming in to help you if you can just hold out a bit longer. I love that Star Citizen has danger in it. For me personally, it is the unknown that keeps me interested. Squaring up to another group of players, never quite knowing whether we're going to pass each other by without incident, or if it's all going to descend into chaos. At the same time, I think SC needs areas where you don't have to worry about getting ganked so much. PvP is just simply not everyone's cup of tea, and for the game to reach and maintain a significant level of population, you can't have the new player experience be one of seal clubbing. Alongside the locations, we also have a more developed idea of NPC guilds, which will span across different game loops, allowing you to build reputation to gain access to rewards, such as crafting blueprints. United Resource Workers cover industrial game loops, the Interstellar Transport Union covers cargo and hauling, the Academy of Science covers scientific research, hunting, farming and exploration, and the Imperial Sports Federation houses all competitive sports, primarily racing but also some combat and even industrial elements. For more combat-focused players, we also have the diametrically opposed Mercenary Guild and Council, providing legal and illegal gameplay. Uniquely, aligning with one of these guilds will flag you as an enemy of the other, providing an element of factionalism within the game that should help to frame some of the violence. These guilds should help to provide meaningful progression outside of a simple push to get more credits, and add some much needed backbone to the game. And something which, to be honest, I hadn't even realised the PU needed until Rich spoke about it, was a main story arc, set against the backdrop of the rivalry between Earth and Terra. Details on this were light, but the goal here is to provide some more direction for new players, introducing them to various gameplay loops and locations rather than just chucking them into a sandbox. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this and about the reward of citizenship for completing it, allowing players greater rights to claim land amongst other things. Economic details were also a bit light, but a key area of the talk was on resource sinks, with probably the most fleshed out details on ship insurance that we've received to date. Now, I think this is really important, so I'm not going to try and squeeze it into this video today, and I'll instead try and put together a short explainer in the near future. For a while now, I've been banging on about Endgame in Star Citizen like some form of broken record, so the fact that this 1.0 presentation took that into serious consideration was huge for me. Not only did Rich Tyra's presentation include details of continuing open world missions, he also referenced instance combat, including fleet battles, strategic missions and FPS operations. Beyond hangars, instanced content isn't something CIG have talked about much, and I for one am looking forward to much more detail on this, particularly if it allows for large-scale raid type content which orgs can assemble for and get going with much quicker than we can now. On top of this we have a layer of dynamic content. The term Star Sim seems to have superseded Quanta. Essentially it's a similar concept of tracking player activity and adjusting the game environment accordingly. So if a particular trade route becomes more and more utilised, the game can dynamically spawn more pirates to potentially get in your way. From a more PvP perspective, Rich also confirmed that large-scale player base raiding will involve a combined arms approach. This system seems to draw some serious inspiration from the opening of The Empire Strikes Back, and was always the way I hoped that PvP around player-owned bases would proceed, with shields that protect your structures from aerial or orbital bombardment, forcing attackers to launch mechanised infantry assaults to sabotage the shields before they can raise or loot the base. But a really cool looking addition to this dynamic, focused on getting players more reliably into the action, is the station warfare system. The SEAL shielding system was a historic planetary shield tech in the Nyx and Pyro systems, similar to planetary shields that will protect bases built in UEE space. However, they required a lot of manual intervention, and the system lacks the capacity to cover entire planets, so player orgs will need to compete at all points along the relay, from the ground-based shield bases to the orbital shield stations, and ultimately the shield relay stations. Factions that control these locations will earn shield tokens that can be used to purchase weekly raid protection for your base. But since there's not enough to go around, they create a point of competition for orgs to lock horns over. Finally though, Ian Leyland really stole the show in my opinion, with his final section on the ultimate end goal for player orgs, space stations. If I can recommend that you watch one section of CitCon 2954 in full, it has to be this one. Space stations are going to represent huge investments in time and resources for player organisations. A pioneer will be required to lay the foundational supply bay, and then your org will need to bring in a vast amount of resources so that the building drones can construct your space station core. Space stations are huge areas set to include a crazy amount of customization options, with internal spaces that can be turned into habitation, medical facilities, generators and shops, as well as additional modules to expand your station with more hangars, cargo decks, refineries and observation decks. These org stations will undoubtedly represent a focal point for the energies of large organisations. Not only do you need to be able to build these giant structures, you've also got to defend them. Within our org, Frontier Consolidated, I've always been clear that I wanted to build a combined, diversified group, with players who are interested in all types of game loops. And this is absolutely perfect as a goal for an org like ours, with explorers and scientists finding and upgrading the blueprints, industrialists gathering resources, logisticians organising the supply chain, and combat players defending us. I understand that some players are going to look at this and feel like it caters too much to large orgs, but honestly it's super important that the game has something for everyone. And while I will always fight for solo players to be included within the game, there has also absolutely got to be something for those of us who love working together in large groups that couldn't be achieved otherwise. This is obviously something of a whistle-stop tour, and I'll be coming back with a full deep dive on space stations, particularly as I'd expect we're going to see this topic featured in future ISCs, so we'll get more info. But it'd be remiss of me not to include the showtopper to the showstopper. So earlier in the day, CIG covered the concept of ship construction within player bases, but space stations allow for something just a little bit bigger. Sat in the crowd as this clip went up, I heard murmurs of Idris, Kraken, Javelin, but not even against a backdrop of this much hopium did any of us dare to say Bengal. The dry dock module will be capable of making the largest capital ships, and while I cannot even imagine how many resources will be required to undertake a project like this, I honestly can't wait to give it a go with my org. Going back through the recordings today to gather footage and take additional notes for this video, I'm honestly quite blown away by how much there was packed into the last 2 days. While I was there, the whole thing seemed to fly by, and honestly there were bits I picked up on that I just completely missed. Maybe because I was stuck in the merge queue. So I'm sure over the coming weeks and months we'll be looking back at plenty of this stuff in a lot more detail. I'm just hoping that for anyone who missed out, this might give you a bit of flavour and encourage you to go and watch parts of the presentation to get more info. With the 324 Spot 2 patch hopefully providing a bit more of a settled experience post-flight cargo and UI changes, I think it's also a great time for me to get back into refreshing guides, since October and November is always the high point for new people entering the game, and folks who've been away for a while just coming back to check it out. So be sure to hit the subscribe button if you think I've earned it, and if you think this would be interesting for you. But with all that said, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I look forward to seeing you next time.